Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by Nick. You may know him as Brooklyn Joker 90 on Twitter, and producer JL, John-Luc Shapiro, is with me as well. On this week's show, plenty to cover with the trade deadline looming just a week away. Matt Rempe's sanity has taken over New York City, not just the NHL, but the sports world at large. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Rangers on a 10-1 heater through the month of February, and we'll see if that continues into March. But there are some reasons for concern as well. The guy who wears number 93, chief among them. So we'll get to all that. Couple of questions as well. Nick, JL, how are you fine gentlemen doing on this Thursday night as we record for a Friday release of the pod this week?
I couldn't be better. I mean, Rangers went 10-1 in February. I went 3-0 at the Garden this past month. Over 500 now for the year, so I'm thrilled. I'm sitting pretty.
Yeah, same here. I had a pretty good track record at Madison Square Garden, along with the Prudential Center and also MetLife Stadium, which, it turned out to be a pretty good game if you hadn't figured it out by now. But I'm doing all right. Rangers are doing well. I have the biggest smile on my face just thinking about it. So can't wait to see what happens later on.
21-7 at home this year, guys, which I think is awesome. Obviously, that's crucial to building a winning season, a season where you are, challenging for first place overall in the league. The Rangers are the first team to 40 wins. They've done it in 60 games. So obviously lots of impressive things happening. As we mentioned, 10-1 in the month of February. The only loss on the road to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they very quickly avenged that loss on Wednesday night with a pretty solid 4-1 victory. They were absolutely the better team through two periods. Columbus had a really big push in the third, but Igor Shesterkin stood tall. He's been lights out in February. I think he's 7-0 and was 7-0 in the month. Save percentage up in the 940s. His overall save percentage is 911 for the year now. So lots of good stuff. And maybe that's the best place to start is the goalie. And Nick, what are your thoughts here on Shesterkin? And I guess maybe we'll put it this way. Were you worried at all? And how are you feeling now?
So I remember I was on with you guys a couple pods ago, and we had talked about like what we wanted to see going into the second half after the All-Star break. And my biggest thing was Igor returning to form. And one of the things was I had said that Igor's built up enough equity with me so far in his career that I wasn't going to worry about him until I saw it become an issue, throughout the second half. And just like I felt he would, he's riding the ship and he's right back on course. And, that now with the Rangers looking a little bit worse defensively than they did in the first half, they have Igor back there now cleaning up their mess, which you don't want to see them rely on, but it's good to know that he can do it again.
Yeah, JL, were you? I mean, I'll admit I was worried, right? And obviously it seems foolish to say it now, but this guy was the backbone of the team, and he was being outplayed by Jonathan Quick to the point where everybody from fans on Twitter to Steve Valiquette were advocating for more Jonathan Quick starts. And now, Valiquette's now sort of couching that and saying, well, I just wanted that to, basically to make Igor mad, to sort of snap him back into a competitive zone. And I'm like, all right, Steve, that's not how I read it when he first said it. But, all that being said, there were legitimate concerns. And it's good to see that those concerns are pretty much put to bed. But yeah, JL, just your thoughts on Igor, the last month of the season and how he's righted the ship here.
Well, I won't lie to you. There was definitely a concern. You just watch, his positioning, especially, with his glove. That was really the big, the really big glaring hole that he was, kind of showing. And, also was all mentioned that, the Rangers defense didn't exactly help, when he was struggling. So it kind of was a mix between, kind of not trusting his glove, not being as aggressive as he should be. And, the defense kind of like letting him down. So it kind of became this sort of amalgamation of factors. But I think what ended up happening is the Rangers ended up winning right before the break. They go to the All-Star break. They kind of get that reset. And then, it's vital to remember that Igor didn't play the first 2 games after the break. It was Jonathan Quick. And excuse me. And I think just that getting back into the groove, in a familiar territory after a break kind of calmed him down because now he just looks like the Igor that we know and love. So a lot of people tend to forget goalie is a very mentally draining position. And it's also just physically
Mm-hmm.
draining too if you've ever even played hockey at some form of another. So clearly it seemed like everything was kind of falling into place now. And then it also helped that the Ranger defense ended up, kind of getting a bit better in the process. So then, those worries kind of got out of the way. I was worried, yes, but I wasn't too overly concerned. If that makes any sense, it just it sucked to see him struggle like that. But you just kind of always knew in the back of your head that this was only just a speed bump.
Yeah, I mean, look, you both mentioned it, so let's talk about it a little bit. The team defense and really the team level performance over these last 11 games has been really fascinating because look, they're 10-1, and I don't want to argue with that, especially because this is in the immediate aftermath of a 25 game stretch where I mean, they countless times outplayed their opponent. We're putting up 40, 50 shots, 80, 90 shot attempts and losing the game, right? So there's that, which I think is very valid, right? And you can make the case that February was just evening those 2 months or month and a half's worth of games out. That said, I'm a little alarmed at this. And look, I don't want to go too deep into the fancy stat stuff, but at this point, I think stuff like expected goals, it's talked about in pretty much all mainstream hockey media, right? So I pulled this up on Natural Stat Trick, which is where I generally go for these sorts of stats. Here's the Rangers across the board in the month of February on kind of those key metrics, right? So their Corsi percentage, right? Just their shot attempt share is 45.44%, right? So below 50. Their Fenwick percentage, 45.6%. Their shots, right? So straight up shots on goal percentage, 45.3. Now the goals for, interesting, right? They've scored 61% of the 5-on-5 goals. Again, these are all 5-on-5 stats. Expected goals percentage, 42. All right. Scoring chances, 44%. High danger chances, 42%. Yada, yada, yada. I think you guys get where I'm going. Now, save percentage, 95.38% at 5-on-5. That is, I believe, tops. It is in the National Hockey League over the last month of the season. So, and to put it just in kind of wider context, that expected goals percentage is good for 28th in the NHL. Only the Ducks, Blues, Sharks, and Blackhawks have been worse since February 1st. So I think what I'm getting at here, guys, is yes, there is some of this is just things that evened out, right? They weren't getting puck luck in December and January. Now they're getting it in February. But also they're getting outplayed for large stretches of game. I mean, I would say that, for as good of a win as Wednesday night's, 4-1 victory over Columbus was, I was watching that third period and I was pretty disappointed. They pretty much did not have the puck. I think Columbus was out shooting them 11-2 at one point. Yes, Columbus is a young, hardworking team. They've got some talent. They've been trending in a positive direction in terms of their scoring chance numbers lately. So that's all fine. But, what you don't want to see, and what I know people flash back to often, is the AV years, right? Where the team would get a lead and then they would turtle. They would not attack. They would not be able to have any puck possession. You're relying really heavily on your goaltender. And I think we've seen that over the long haul, that's not really sustainable. And certainly in the playoffs, when you're going to be facing even more desperate teams and more talented teams, it's really not a way to win a Stanley Cup. So all of that said, do you guys think I'm crazy for even being concerned about this? Do you think it'll level off? Or do you think this is there are legitimate team level issues here beyond the goaltending.
There's definitely something to it because it you know, for if it's 1 or 2 games, you kind of write it off on when it becomes a continuous habit, which this has become. You have to start paying attention and noticing it. So I am definitely worried about their level of comfortability when they do get a lead, especially because it's kind of like having Hank back there, where it's like, well, we know we can sit back a little bit because the goalie will bail us out, so we can sit on the lead a little bit. So having that great superstar, and this is where like a lot of teams I know are against having, well, not against, but they don't prioritize goaltending because I do believe it creates an attitude of, well, the goalie will save us, so we can rest on our laurels a little bit.
I think that's such a great point. I think it's one of the things that frankly doesn't get talked about enough, Nick, is like there is, something to, and then you also, another added layer to that is you have Shesterkin himself has come out in the media and said like, I'd rather face more shots. Like he says, I'm more comfortable when I get more work. And I'm like, all right, well, I understand that. Like that makes perfect sense to me. Trust me. Like I'm sure it's not easy to go 10, 12, 14 minutes without seeing a shot. And then, the next thing you see, especially if it's an odd man rush or a breakaway, or it's a bunch of power play chances. Absolutely. But that's a slippery slope, right? I mean, you don't want to get into exclusively counterattack hockey, right? So it is a balance. Look, I think there are some players, and we'll talk about Mika specifically a little bit later because there is a question about him. But there are some players to me, and JL, I don't know if you feel this way, but like that just haven't looked comfortable all year in Laviolette's system. And I'm not blaming Laviolette here. I just think it's a natural thing where you get a new coach and there's different tactics. And we know that Laviolette does change things up in terms of coverages and forechecks and things like that. But Mika's one of the guys that hasn't looked comfortable. Jimmy Vesey hasn't looked comfortable. He didn't look comfortable early in the year, and he doesn't look good the last 5 or 6 games. Will Cooley's game has leveled off. Ryan Lindgren's game, if you look at his underlying numbers, has kind of gone into the tank. He's kind of like a little bit of, kind of entering the Dan Girardi zone a little bit. But and his partner hasn't been that great either. So there are, like I said, a handful of guys who to me just haven't looked comfortable this season. And, now it's a question of like, look, yes, the trade deadline may solidify some of this. And, if you get a top line right wing that complements Mika and Kreider, hopefully they're a little bit more consistent. Maybe they do look at a depth defenseman. Maybe that, that third line center can stabilize the Cooley line. But JL, any thoughts about, why, the Rangers seem to be a little bit less in control of the tempo of the game? Because remember, the thing that we absolutely loved in October and November was, this team was not only winning, they were dominating games. They were out shooting their opponent. They were, again, dictating play. They were locking teams down. They were winning games 2-1, and then they were winning the track meet style games too. That they were afraid of no game. So that doesn't seem to be the case right now. It seems more like they've gotten some leads, they've held on, they've had a couple of furious comebacks, i.e., the Stadium Series game. So it's just been a little bit inconsistent, I think.
Well, it's something I've been trying to wrap my head around all year. It's strange. I wouldn't call it concerning. It's more strange because you try to, normally the answer is pretty black and white in most instances. For example, like Panarin didn't do well in Gallant's system because it was too free roaming. Or, this person, Gabrick didn't really, even though Gabrick did thrive, Gabrick wasn't really a guy, that would fit in like a Tortorella system. So there was always kind of that black and white answer. But when you look at like Laviolette's system and the way that the team has kind of, catered to a lot of the skill in many aspects, it is very strange to see a lot of these guys who performed very well last year kind of just not look comfortable. And, I mean, granted, we're kind of speaking on a different level of uncomfortable here because obviously the Rangers are, one of the best teams in the league. And even in their shortcomings, they're still better than, 95% of the league. So, we're definitely speaking from a different point of view. But, us being fans of a New York team, we're expecting excellence all the time. And when we know that there is a player out there who can get, who's given that, excellent, that type of excellence, like, a Mika Zibanejad and like a Ryan Lindgren, you tend to become worried. I personally think it's still the system. Even though I think they should have gotten used to it by now, but it just kind of seems as if, you know, uh, Kreider, I think, has a bit more of a handle on it. It also helps that he just has ridiculous speed, so that kind of helps in his own, in his own case. But with Mika, you can just kind of tell he's still trying to find his spot on the ice, and he's definitely shown flashes this season, and his play has gotten slightly better. And obviously, we'll touch on the big thing, that really hasn't come about since last year, but it's kind of like is this who he is for this year? What could possibly be done? And like you said, maybe the trade deadline ends up, really stabilizing this team, because I think a lot of the performances really ended up cratering once they really lost Heedle and lost Fox for a bit. So it's kind of like how long is that adjustment period from that November game to now? And will the new acquisitions, because we all know Drury's going to definitely have to make some moves, will these new acquisitions end up kind of helping that indirectly? So I'm just more confused by it. Like early in the season,
agree.
like I said, it was early in the season. It was like Braden Schneider was having some trouble, but he's kind of, gotten the gist of it. So it's just really strange to me.
I mean, you bring up a great point too there, JL, just about the Heedle injury really throws the depth of this line. It's probably really one of the three centers, right? Even with Zibanejad having a down year, if you lose, the strength of this team is down the middle, because Trocheck has proven to be, I mean, what a signing. Now we're looking at that signing now, in his second season. And sure, we'll see how the contract ages as we move through years, 3, 4, I think it's a 6-year deal, right? So years 4, 5, and 6, I think, are really where, some questions may pop up. But, losing a top center, one of your top 3 centers, when you are built to be strong down the middle is tough to sustain. Now, Johnny Brodzinski deserves a ton of credit for the way he stepped in and performed, but he's not Philip Heedle. And I think it's not controversial to say that. And there's a reason why the Rangers have been, very publicly, for as public as they can be, shopping for a third line center. So that's a great point. I think Fox's injury certainly hampered his ability to get back up to speed, if he was kind of getting there when he did get hurt. And look, again, it's not my goal here to be, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer on a 10-1 winning, streak here. Like, the Rangers are playing well. And I think, not to sort of, I'm not referring directly to it, but like the whole money puck deserved to win o-meter thing. Like, they've deserved to win most of the 10 games that they did win, right? Like, it's not like, you're looking at every single game being like, wow, they really stole that one. Or, it's like, Igor was the sole reason they won a game. Now, he's been incredible, and that has certainly helped. But I do think it's just something that bears watching. And I think I'm just in a place where we've seen Ranger teams that profile this exact way year after year after year, right? Where it's like, well, they're not that good 5-on-5, but they have the goalie, right? And then most recently, they have the elite power play. And we feel like that could be enough. And then they get into playoff series against superior opponents who are better 5-on-5 teams, and they lose. And I'm not saying that's how it's going to go this year. There's still plenty of season left for them to, there's a quarter of a season left for them to solidify their 5-on-5 game. But I'm telling you right now, if you're only getting 42% of the high danger chances at 5-on-5 in most games, you're not going to win in the playoffs. You're just not. And so that's something that I'm keeping an eye on, I'll say, as we get into March here. Nick, any thoughts from you on kind of like the team level, play of the Rangers?
I honestly, I don't think they're that bad 5-on-5. Like, I don't think they're that far away. I think it's just a matter of consistency and keeping that level throughout the game, and not getting lackadaisical and being like, okay, well, we have the lead, so we can take our foot off the gas a little bit. That's where I think they get themselves into trouble. Because when like last night, for instance, they absolutely, I mean, if it wasn't for Merzlikins, that game could have been 4-0 in the first period.
100%.
They were all over Columbus. They were letting Columbus know that they're the better team and that they have no chance at winning. And they were on track to get goalie last night. And then Igor did what Igor does, and he made some really clutch saves at big moments. And I mean, there was one last night where JL, you might remember the one I'm about to bring up. I can't remember who the Jackets player was in front, but he just like threw his head up and looked at the garden ceiling, like, what do we have to do to get one past him? And it was
Yes. Yeah. I
You
know.
remember
I
the-
know exactly which one you're talking about. Yes. It was right in front of me.
I can't remember who the player was who did it, but it was just one of those things where I thought it was really funny because it was one of those things that I used to see Hank do to opposing players for so long, where they were just like, God, what do we have to do? So it was just one of those. I think last night was just one of those nights where the Rangers knew Igor wasn't getting beaten, and it just kind of, they were like, okay, we can just relax, make the safe play, and even if we screw up here, Igor's got our back. So I just think for them, it's that consistency and just being able to finish games because they're going to learn, especially as we go down the stretch here. I mean, Saturday night in Toronto will be against Toronto will be a great test for them because Toronto's got offensive firepower. If you have a 1-goal lead against them, it's not safe. So they're going to have, so they're going to have to bring it for 60 minutes. And if they have a lead going into the third period, they're going to have to see. And maybe that game will be good for them because you know what? Maybe they'll give up the lead in the third period because they're playing too safe. And it'll wake them up to, okay, hey, the game's not done. We have to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's also very true is, they are not or haven't been, I would say, for a team that's gone 10-1, especially, they haven't been particularly consistent within games, right? They've had these really great stretches where they've dominated, but then the stretches where they don't dominate, they are getting dominated, right? It's not like it's kind of a 50-50 game or it's a lot of neutral zone play. Like it's kind of one or the other. Either they are completely dominant and they're throwing a ton of great chances on the opposing team's net, or vice versa. They're getting hemmed in shift after shift. So something to bear in mind. And also look, I mean, the reason that, I think we all like Peter Laviolette is, he's the first coach I can remember in recent memory, maybe other than Torts, right? Who I think acknowledges this stuff, right? Even when they win, if they don't play well, he understands the balance of process and results. So, and look, the results are great. Again, I'm not trying to throw cold water on this. They have 40 wins in 60 games. They're 10-1 in their last 11. And like you said, Nick, great test coming up on Saturday in Toronto. Before we get to the questions, I do want to talk a little bit about Matt Rempe. Nick, you and I were not on the show last week, so we haven't really gotten a chance to throw our 2 cents in about this. But look, I saw a photo on Wednesday afternoon before the Rangers Jackets game, and the NHL store put 2 jerseys in the window. They put Adam Fantilli, who wasn't playing, right, because he's injured, and Matt Rempe was also featured prominently in the NHL store window in Manhattan. So they're jumping right in. There were features in publications that don't write about the Rangers unless they are in like the Eastern Conference Final. I'm talking about the Wall Street Journal. I'm talking a lot about the Canadian media, who tends to ignore the New York Rangers for one reason or another. So, this became very much a Linsanity thing. I mean, they were talking hockey on WFAN and ESPN New York Radio more than they usually would, and posting clips about it on social media. So, this is something that, since the outdoor game has blown up. And look, I mean, I think that's great. First of all, I just want to say that, even if because it was based on fighting, and that, that certainly has, there's 2 sides to that story, and the way people feel about fighting. It's a very nuanced conversation. But I think the story of Rempe and the way he's come into the league is one worth telling and one worth promoting. I think it, brings, I think it does bring positive attention to the game. I don't think, this isn't like one of those things where he committed an egregiously violent on ice act and it's getting all attention for the wrong reasons. it's kind of an endearing story about a kid who's worked his ass off to make the NHL, and now he's living the dream. So that said, and I know, you might want to go this direction, Nick, so I'll lead you into it. It was good to see him play 8 minutes of actual hockey on Wednesday night and not have to fight.
Oh, 100%. I was thrilled to see him actually play and see what he can really bring to the table and what he can do. And I'll tell you what, he didn't look out of place. He actually looked like he has a little bit of skill to his game. Nothing crazy, but he just looks like he can be a really good fourth liner in the NHL. That can, he'll be tough. He'll be in on the forecheck. I mean, that fourth line between him and Edstrom, they were creating turnovers. They were making Columbus's D crazy because every time they were in Columbus's zone, they were hitting anything that moved. They were finishing checks. They have long reach too, which kills breakout passes. So I mean, there's a lot to really like about Rempe's game. And I mean, offensively, when he gets the puck, he doesn't treat it like a grenade, like a usual, you know, all I'm here to do is fight kind of fourth liner. He looks to actually try and make plays with the puck. So I think once he learns that he doesn't always have to fight, that there's other aspects of his game that can really make him effective, I think he'll really become a productive member to the Rangers' fourth line.
Yeah, Jay, I'll get your thoughts in a second. I think just quickly on Edstrom as well, he has a really good, first of all, he's a great skater. I think Rempe's a good skater for his size. Like Edstrom can actually really move. He's got a really fluid stride, and I'm impressed with his skating. I think he's a level up on Rempe. He also has a really good understanding of the space around him, right? He made a couple of plays in the game Wednesday night where he, was able to kind of put the puck into space kind of around a defender and then go get it, right? Because he knew he had the speed on a backtracking defender to go recover. He made a couple of nice passes kind of, through the triangle, as they say, right between the stick and the skates. So his understanding of the space is really impressive to me for a young kid who plays a kind of a heavy physical game and kind of comes with that reputation. I mean, I think Edstrom, might really have legs as a guy who could be like a depth scoring option, not just a fourth liner. I think to your point, Nick, Rempe kind of profiles as a classic, fourth liner with some skill to his game. JL, what are your thoughts on overall on Matt Rempe?
I absolutely love this kid. You can notice him on the ice, for obvious reasons, but for a lot of the points that you guys said, he puts himself in the right position, and perfectly said too that he knows his space. you know outside of him basically murdering Nathan Bastian, which that was kind of borderline. I can understand why it was a penalty, but other than that, he's been very conscious, and obviously with the fighting, it didn't really help his cause per se. It helps with the narrative because the kid can really chuck him. But like Nick said, it was really nice to see him play hockey without having to stay off the ice for 5 minutes and then maybe some more after that. I would always say, and I've said this on this podcast and I've said this privately and also publicly on Twitter as well, is that the Rangers have never really had sort of like a fourth line or kind of like a really big guy of their own outside of like maybe Brian Boyle, but that was a trade. It doesn't really come to me when I try to think about past Ranger teams over the last maybe 15 or so years that they've really had a guy that was one of their own that they called up, and he was just an effective fourth liner who had size and some skill. It's always kind of been piecemeal together. And if you look at a lot of the contending teams that the Rangers had, that was always kind of the same sentiment there. So now you have a guy like Rempe who is a good skater, and then you throw him in with a guy like Edstrom, who you also, man, I've also waxed poetic about. Everyone knows that Edstrom is my boy. He's a really good skater. So you put the two together, and like you guys said, the size. I mean, just sitting in the Stadium Series game, you noticed him. He wasn't a small guy. Like you look at like a Gustafson or like a Fox, and you could kind of tell that they're kind of on the smaller side, on the height size. But Edstrom Edstrom and Rempe, let me tell you, man, from all the way up in the 300 section up at MetLife Stadium, you can see them. So it's, and it's really nice to see, also the story about, his father passing away, before he made it, and, him having a very close relationship with his family, kind of really also helps with the narrative. And I personally think, I know that this team needs a lot of reinforcements, but I personally think they can go to war. If you reinforce the third line and you get yourself another winger, for the top line, I 100% believe that this team can run a fourth line of Edstrom, Goodrow, and Rempe in the playoffs. Maybe Rempe can switch with somebody else, maybe like with a VC or maybe like a Pitlick worst case scenario. But I honestly think that they can roll in the playoffs with those guys just off the sheer size alone. And if there's anything that we can describe the NHL's, the playoffs, it's a war of attrition. So having a bigger body definitely helps. And it also helps to have a bigger body that actually can somewhat play. And one more thing, you look at a guy like him compared to like a Ryan Reeves. Matt Rempe is pretty much what you want Ryan Reeves to do. Not only could he fight, but he can also move around. Similar to how Reeves was when he kind of started, and then when he played, in St. Louis, he kind of had some kind of skill, but then obviously that faded away over the years. So Rempe is what we basically wanted out of Ryan Reeves.
Well, yeah, and to your point, it's also good, that you don't have to import these guys, right? Because that just it's free agency money that could be spent otherwise. Whereas, now these are in theory, internal cost control solutions for your bottom six. Yeah, I mean, my last point, like one of the things that's been amazing to watch, and there's been a couple of sequences in each game that they've played together. There have been, like I said, multiple occasions where they've both gone to the net, like to set a screen. Mm-hmm. And that's just like, I can't imagine what that's like for a goalie trying to look through the two of them and find the puck. And of course, that's how Rempe got his goal, right? Screening the goalie. So it went off his leg. They don't have to be pretty. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, look, I also think that to your point about the playoffs, JL, they both, to me, are like the perfect kind of change of pace guys that you can throw into a playoff series for 1 or 2 games. If you do want to kind of change momentum or give the other team something else to think about, again, injuries, suspensions, all these things happen. So, yeah, I would think they'll both be on the roster. How much they play to be determined.
I could really see Edstrom being a difference maker in the playoffs.
I think him more so than Rempe. I would agree.
I think he's got that Brian Boyle in him. I hope anyway, but
I agree.
That's kind of where I could see him projecting out.
For sure. All right, I was going to get to the question. So we've got one from Tyler. I think we're going to save that one for last because we can kind of get into some trade deadline stuff with that. And the second question here, the one before that, will also be trade related. But I want to go to this one first. It's from Anthony Cacchioli at Cacchioli25 on Twitter, or X as they call it now. Mika Zibanejad has not scored a 5-on-5 goal since December 23rd versus Buffalo. At this point in the season, do you think acquiring a right wing a top line right wing, will help solve those issues, or is there a bigger problem with his game that's leading to his lack of goal scoring at even strength? Nick, I know you were enthusiastic about this question specifically, so why don't you start?
Oh, I love this question because this is just one of those things that I've been looking at with Mika, and the biggest thing that I can say is he's pressing, and you can see that he's pressing. And part of his issue is he's trying so hard because he knows he's not scoring. He's trying to at least set everybody else up, and he's not willing to shoot. But the other problem is, too, he's not getting time and space. If you notice, guys are really attacking him to try and take his shot away and force him to pass. So the teams are now, because they know that he's not shooting as much, but they want to take that time and space away. Because let's face it, when Mika shoots, he can really shoot. So he's one of those guys that you don't want to see get hot, because when he scores in. He's kind of like Ovi. When he gets hot, he really gets hot. So it's one of those things where teams are really keying in on him to slow him down. And the biggest thing that he needs, and I wrote about this, and I know it should be coming out in the next couple of days, He needs, in the worst way, that right wing that can score but also has speed to back off defenses. The Rangers, if they add, and I really want them to add one player in particular. This is why I'm so against Frank Vetrano, because Vetrano's a volume shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Mika needs that opposite wing to really help push the defense back to give him time. If he gets that, he'll start getting going, and you'll see him start scoring more 5-on-5. I just think it's one of those things where he just also has to get himself in the mindset too that he's got to let it go, and it's okay to be selfish at this point. I think he's just trying to be too unselfish.
JL?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You can definitely see, the thing about Mika's game is not Mika has kind of this jump when he's on his game, and he just kind of is able to bulldoze his way, especially when he skates through the middle. He's got phenomenal hands, and that shot, like you said, is probably one of the best in the league, just like Ovechkin. Um, I'm not too overly concerned. Because one, the team's winning, and two, he hasn't been totally useless. He's done things on the power play, and with the way his season gone, you're going to take what you can get at this point. And with the fact that the team is winning, obviously you want more from your number one center, which is completely understandable. And obviously I want him to score more 5-on-5. But he hasn't been totally useless. Could he do a little more 5-on-5? Of course. That's probably 95% of what the playoffs is going to end up becoming. So you want to obviously see that improve, but you're absolutely right, Nick. He's pressing, and he just doesn't look natural out there. And whether he's either fighting something, either physically fighting something mentally, or both, you can just tell something's up. And again, like I said, he's still not totally useless, but again, you're absolutely right that a winger would be, of like a, like an Anthony Duclair, or the biggest pipe dream currently right now, like a Jake Gensel, somebody like that, that would be ideal for that type of line, because then you have Kreider, who has the speed, Mika's the playmaker, and then the other winger is the one that creates the space. So, it's just, I'm not trying to get too up in arms about it because the team is winning, so it's good to see that. So it's kind of one of those things you can kind of look past, especially when he actually does produce on the power play. And I know we talk about power play merchants and all that, but, what are you going to do to replace him? We know the guy has the talent. You might as well just kind of let it ride and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. So I mean, this is as bad as he's played. So Jay, I mean, I'm not like totally disagreeing with you. Like he's not useless. I'll agree with that. That's a very low bar for your star center making $8.5 million a year for him to not be useless. This is the worst he's played, and I don't want to mince words. Like he has had long stretches of like not being able to do anything with the puck. I mean, to me, that's pretty alarming because it's just not him. And which indicates to me that something might be up. Now, whether that's injury related or, like you said, mentally. I mean, he just had a kid, and I've have had experience with that, and that is not an insignificant life change. Your rest, your whole world gets affected, especially your rest. Now, look, if Becky were on the pod, and I'll say it as well, like he makes $8.5 million, I'm sure they could afford help, especially during the season. I know you want to
Right.
raise your kid and all that, but they can certainly afford some help around the house with that. That's neither here nor there. Even the power play production to me there's been a lot of secondary assists. That he has not really scored too many of those patented left circle goals lately. Obviously gets the big one in the Stadium Series game, ties the game late. That's awesome. He was also on a 6-on-4. The power play at 5-on-4 has not been particularly effective. That's another kind of anomaly of the streak. The power play's gone kind of cold, especially when it's been operating out of its setup. I think what bothers me is, Mika Zibanejad is the type of player that like really shouldn't need an elite right wing. Like now, look, you definitely need the pieces to fit. You know, we saw this with Artemi Panarin, and the sort of quest to find him the right winger. And who knew it was Alexei Lafreniere all along. You know, Mika Zibanejad is supposed to be the type of player that like is independently great, or at least very good. Even if he doesn't have optimal line mates, we know him and Kreider do work well together. There have been a lot of people calling, to break them up. I don't see it happening. I think maybe that's a slightly more viable option if Philip Hedl is healthy, right? Because if you remember, Vincent Trocheck was on the third line at the start of the season. They had Hedl centering Panarin and Lafreniere. So if you had, a truly skilled third line center, maybe that makes sense, you put Kreider with that player, but they're not going to have that, and even if they trade for Adam Henrique or Tommy Novak, or Alexander Wenberg, like I'm not messing around with Kreider and Zibanejad. I'm keeping them together. That said, I think you do bring up some really good points, Nick, about speed that creates some space. The right type of player. I mean, I think the results have been decent with Capo Caco. Again, that line tends to be very good defensively. They do get tough matchups, but they don't generate a lot. And I think Caco's style of game just doesn't fit great with Zibanejad and Kreider when it comes to generating a lot of scoring chances. They don't give up much, so the metrics are going to look good. Like all that stuff is going to look good with that threesome on the ice, but they're not really getting a lot of prime scoring opportunities. And I think the hesitancy to shoot the puck is glaring. I think Mika I think he took one shot off the rush in the Columbus game on Wednesday night, but that's all I can remember. I think he did a deflection, maybe on the power play. No, that wasn't even a shot by him. That was a pass by him and a deflection by Trocheck. So, for a guy who is an elite finisher in this league, and I don't have the stats in front of me. Maybe I'll pull them up, next time, but he might just not be shooting the puck enough. And that's a change that Artemi Panarin made, and he's having the best scoring season of his life. So, there's a lot there. And I'll close with this, though. I will close with a little bit of positivity. When you listen to this podcast, it's going to be March 1st. And we do know that Mika March is a real thing. He has been absolutely lights out since 2020 in the month of March. And maybe that's what he needs. As silly as it sounds, maybe he just needs the calendar to turn, the games to get a little bit bigger, right? That the spotlight starts getting a little bit brighter. You start getting ready for playoffs. And that does seem to be when he is at his best. So maybe, I am a believer, at least, that another Mika March is incoming. So let's hope I'm right. All right. Next question comes from, by the way, I absolutely love this, this Twitter handle. It's at Cosmo Kreider. So obviously a play on words.
I like that.
For Seinfeld.
That's pretty
That's
cool,
fantastic.
actually.
Cosmo Kreider, yeah. All right. The Rangers were able to get Vetrano for cheap the first time from Florida, even though Florida was a contender, because they were trying to clear space for a bigger trade. Are there any contenders this year trying to clear space for a big trade that the Rangers might be able to take advantage of? That's an interesting question. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. I mean, the team that kind of comes to mind for me, and they're not a contender, but they thought they were going to be, is Pittsburgh. And, to me, Pittsburgh is in a situation where they kind of got bullied by Sidney Crosby, and rightfully so. I mean, he deserves it. The guy's an all-time great. But basically, he said, keep the band together, right? Sign Malkin, sign Letang. Then Dubas goes out and completes the Infinity Stone thing by getting Erik Karlsson. And I don't know anything about Marvel, so that's just me trying to make a weird reference.
It fits.
But he gets the final Infinity
like
Stone, right? I think it works with Karlsson, and it doesn't work. The Penguins are very mediocre. I believe their chances of making the playoffs are below 50% as we record this podcast. And they are considering trading Jake Gensel. Now they have another player that I think might be attainable, again, for kind of this reason that Cosmo Kreider brings up. They want to start clearing space, whether it's for a bigger trade or just a quote unquote retool on the fly. Riley Smith. Riley Smith, I know he has not had a good season. He's getting up there in age, but he is talk about a guy who could be an absolute perfect fit next to Mika and Kreider. And just is the perfect playoff style player, the kind of guy that you could totally envision trading for him and getting, 7 or 8 huge goals in a playoff run out of. And he's obviously got that experience. He's that style of player. So that's the one that came to mind for me, guys. I mean, it doesn't quite fit the criteria of the question. I don't know if there's anything off the top of either of your heads in that vein.
I don't have a specific player in mind, but there's one team that's coming to mind, and of course they're in the Eastern Conference as well. The Tampa Bay Lightning, because it sounds like they want Noah Hannafin. Noah Hannafin wants them. So I could maybe see something. I could see Tampa looking to move some money off the books. Maybe a Nick Paul, who I would take in the bottom 6 for the Rangers. They're one team, another team I could see because they don't have a lot of flexibility in ways of picks or prospects. But being trade partners with the Rangers would be highly unlikely. It would be the Boston Bruins.
Yeah. They're such a weird team to me. I don't know if I want to go on that tangent right now, but they are not good. They've lost
really not.
6 games
they are
in a row
overtime
in
heroes.
overtime. Yes. The amount of extra points they've gotten, the amount of leads they've blown to then go to overtime and either win the game or they get the loser point anyway.
Well, it happened again tonight against Vegas. They were up 3-0. The game's 4-4 now in the third period.
Yeah, I mean, they are such a fake team. They lost their generational center, their best player. And, you're trying to tell me that like Charlie Coyle has done the job to replace him. Not to mention they lost Krejci as well. I mean, this is they're such a fake team, and it's going to really annoy me if they like win a couple of rounds in the playoffs. And that's like who the Rangers have to play in the Eastern Conference Finals. I would take it because, again, I don't think they're very good, but I also don't think they deserve to be where they are in the standings right now, which is, right alongside the Rangers. Anyway, I'm sorry. JL, do you have any thoughts on this question?
One team that comes to mind that, I haven't looked at the standings today. I assume they're still a contender, but I think Seattle might be one of those teams. I know they might have fallen off a little bit, if I'm correct on that. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, but they're fading. Let's put it that way. They're fading pretty fast.
But they're still, at least at this point of this podcast, they're still considered contenders. So they are probably looking to try and possibly move, even though there was a report that came out about possibly wanting to extend Jordan Eberle, but I don't think, as dim as Ron Francis has been, as a general manager, I don't think he would pass up a good deal for a guy like Eberle because, he's always, you saw it in Carolina. He was, very gun-ho with trades. So Seattle's one of those teams that I think the Rangers could definitely take advantage of in terms of salary. Maybe like a guy, maybe like an Eberle, maybe like even a Yanni Gourde if that, if that ends up becoming possible. Because I feel like the Rangers are really that. I feel like that's the guy that they want, like just off a hunch. I don't have any information about that, but I just know that that's somebody that would fit the bill for that team, and I think that with Mika and Kreider, you could just throw him there and then just find somebody else to get that bottom 6. I'm trying to think of maybe Toronto to a degree could probably be one of those teams that maybe would.
They're always in cap hell too.
Yeah, they might want to shed some salary. I can't off the top of my head figure out who exactly, but they seem like a candidate for, if they really want to add more depth, they're going to let go of, an asset that would really be able to help them. So I think
I just thought of one.
What?
I'm sorry, JL. One just came to mind, and it's one guy who is actually playing well for them, but they need to offload his money. Colorado and Ryan Johansson.
I was just thinking that because I'm watching the Avalanche Blackhawks game right now, and
that's what I have on too, and that's what brought that to my mind. I was like, I forgot about him.
Well,
Yeah.
wasn't he like not very good in the beginning of the season? Like people were literally talking about like this is not working at all. Has he kind of improved? Because the narrative, at least earlier in the year, I mean, I haven't followed it closely, was that Johansson was kind of a bust there, and they were waiting for him to figure it out.
I think he's
That's
playing third line minutes for them, if I'm correct.
yeah.
Well, that
They,
too, yeah.
but they want an upgrade over him.
Yeah.
They're one of the teams that's rumored to be in on Henrique too.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
he's only got 22 points as of before tonight. He's -7, and this is a guy that was an absolute menace down the middle for Columbus and Nashville. You know, he was, he was putting up, you know, let's see, he
he's
had
a
a
he's a
couple of,
1-time 30 goal scorer.
yeah.
Like
So
he's very enigmatic. He's a weird one.
yeah, because he had 71 points in 14-15 for Columbus, and he had 63 points another season as well. 63, 71, 60. And then he had a total, oh, that was the 60-point season where he got traded. 61, 54, 64, 36, 22, 63, 28, and 22. So
He did play some of his best hockey though in Nashville for
no, he
Peter
did.
Laviolette.
There you go.
So his cap hit is $8 million, and he's got another year after this. So that's the other wrinkle here. So you'd obviously need to find. You might have to do one of those 3-team trades where one team retains half, and then another team retains half of that, and that I mean, it can be done. They did it for Patrick Kane, right? I believe. So it can be done, but it seems unlikely. But no, in the spirit of the question, that is the type of player where yeah, certainly they would be looking to shed that cap hit. And if they want to upgrade on the position, and yeah, I mean, it's not the worst idea in the world, or buy as a buy low candidate, right? Because you're probably not paying that much for a guy with that type of cap hit and that low production at that age. The connection with Laviolette doesn't intrigue me as well, for sure. I actually would love to look at his. I was just looking at his stats as well, JL, and in the playoffs, this is a guy who he had a 13-point playoff performance. He had a 14-point playoff performance. Those are in back-to-back seasons in Nashville. So, and then he's about a point per game in the playoffs, 54 points in 67 games. So a little less than that, but pretty good scoring rate when, certainly the, people aren't piling up easy ones in the playoffs. So, yeah, interesting names. What I'll say about the deadline is this, and then we'll get to Tyler's question and have a little fun. I don't really expect the Rangers to just do the thing that everybody expects them to do. They never do. Everyone's just been screaming Henrique and Vetrano, and like I don't think that's what's going to happen. If it does, fine. This will be a very boring and predictable trade deadline, and I'm sure those players will be helpful. I have my doubts about whether or not they put them over the top as a Stanley Cup, contender / winner. I think just the way the Rangers operate and the way that these things often happen, there will be something that happens that is unexpected. And it might be something like a Ryan Johansson or a Riley Smith or a name that's not on everybody's, top 15, top 20, trade board type of article. So
Trevor Zegras.
Well, there you go. That would be the big one.
Well, you basically, you go back to the Cop and Toronto trades, which, at the time were brilliant, because it fit exactly what the team needed perfectly. And that's the thing, and I'll end on this. That's the thing I like about Drury is that, it's become very unpredictable. So it kind of gives you that extra allure. You kind of knew with like Sather and Gordon what they were going to go after, so it was kind of obvious. What the Rangers need. And I think Chris Drury kind of tends to, look more than what we see. Yeah, obviously the interest between Anaheim is legit because even as much as Vetrano is a volume shooter, he wouldn't be totally awful on this team. And Henrique would
He would
obviously
help.
no, of course. And Henrique, it's like the safe option if you think about it, because Henrique,
Mhm.
he can play third, fourth line minutes if he needs to. He's got enough skill. I know a lot of Ranger fans won't be able to get over 2012, but that was years ago. Get over it. We're better than them anyways. So, that's kind of like the safe option. And also, it just doesn't help that, a lot of what we hear kind of gets the only reason why we make these speculations really is because of what we see with the beat reporters and things that they may have heard or snippets that may have heard. But you know, who was the one player that you could probably say the Rangers were going to absolutely 100% going to get with Patrick Kane? I think last year was the only deadline that was really predictable because, we all knew the interest in Tarasenko was real. That was obvious. But then, Patrick Kane goes out in the media and says, "Hey, I don't want to play for Toronto," and basically gets his trade to the Rangers. So that's pretty much it. So I can't wait.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
actually very curious.
and even the Tarasenko trade, they also bring Mikola in. Sammy Blais goes back to St. Louis. So the trade itself was not your classic oh, it's one guy coming over for a pick and a prospect, right? There was layers to that trade as well.
Yeah.
And Drury also tends to do that. He likes to get multiple players in a deal, which again does lend some credence to the Henrique Vetrano approach. But I don't know. I like Riley Smith's a guy for me that that's kind of, no one said that name, but it makes perfect sense that Pittsburgh would want to move him. And, they probably would be more likely to trade a guy like him to the Rangers as opposed to Gensel. But even still, dealing with Pittsburgh would probably not realistic. Given the whole, they're a division rival and they wouldn't want to strengthen the Rangers for a cup run. So we'll see. All right. So on trade stuff, a few weeks ago, our colleague Tyler at T McGillick 93 on Twitter posed this question that we didn't get to, and then a few weeks went by, and so we owe Tyler an answer. I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but it's basically this: list your 5 worst trade deadlines in the time you've been a Ranger fan. I'm going to put my hand up and say I did not do the research here, and I don't have the encyclopedic memory to go back and remember, the litany of trades made throughout the years at each deadline. Nick, I know you have a list. I would imagine, since you and I are, similar fans, roughly the same age, that my list would be very similar to your list. Maybe I'll have 1 or 2 things to add. JL, I don't know how prepared you are for this question. So let's let Nick kick it off, and then we can kind of go from there, if that makes sense.
All right, so I did this from 5 to 1. Number 5, really easy, like slam dunk, empty net. Getting Eric Stahl made no sense. Team wasn't competitive. They were not winning the cup. It was so annoying. Thank God Alexi Sorella never worked out, because we had no prospect pool to speak of, and then one of our top prospects at that point we sent for a over the hill Eric Stahl, who then went to who AV didn't even use correctly, and then goes to Minnesota and had like a 40-goal season. So
Yep.
it was just one of those things where it was just like, wow, that just failed on multiple fronts.
Well, and also there was a very cynical take on this as well, which again, I'll speak on behalf of my lovely wife here, but she always likes to bring this up. They were attracted to that deal for as much the marketing angle as the hockey angle, with Mark being on the team as well. They were
100%.
immediately putting out stuff that said NYR family and the Stalls are brothers. It was truly vomit inducing. It was just so annoying and gross. And I mean, I would have had this higher on my list, Nick. If I actually made a list of 5, this might have been 2 or 1, because this just made that trade itself makes my blood boil. So totally agree that it's on the worst.
Wait till I get to 2 and 1. You'll be very upset with me for bringing these 2 up. All right, number 4. The idea was right. The execution was wrong. JT Miller and Ryan McDonough to Tampa Bay. We weren't keeping McDonough. He was going to walk. You had to start the rebuild somewhere. It hurt. If there's somehow we can get McDonough from Nashville right now to be a depth defenseman on our third pair at reduced cost, I would take him back in a heartbeat, because I love Mac. It just Nemesnikov, Libor Hayek, good God, Brett Howden. Just the only somewhat good thing that came out of that trade was Keandre Miller, and even that
Right.
the jury's still out on. So there's nothing good there. It's all bad, just all bad.
Yeah, well, and I mean so that was the right after the letter, right? So the only counterbalance of that trade is the fact that the Rick Nash trade really turned into total gold for the team. So but it's, you'd like to not have, your A+ trade balanced out by a complete disaster of a trade, and it does certainly seem now years later that the McDonough JT Miller trade was truly a disaster. And also the fact that they kind of had, like, they were forced to throw in JT Miller was kind of like a throw into that deal as well, which is like obviously very annoying now because he's a point per game or more player on a contending team in
He would have
Vancouver.
fit
And
perfect here.
if it
And then
yeah,
Tampa got a first rounder for JT from Vancouver.
right. No, I know. So we got like absolutely dog walked all over the place with that trade. It was really bad.
I mean, it's just that one still hurts my soul.
Yeah.
Number 3, I understand why they weren't more aggressive during this 2011, 2012. The only move they made was getting John Scott.
Oh,
I
wow.
understand they didn't want to, mess with what they had going. They had great mojo, and the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The team needed more. And I'm not saying that they needed to get Rick Nash at that deadline. Actually, what I'm going to say is contrary to that. They needed depth scoring. They needed to go out and they needed to do what LA did and trade for Jeff Carter. That's what they needed to do. And
Yeah.
it was one of those things because that team lost because it got outworked by the Devils' third and fourth lines. Because outside of the Gabrick and Richards, we had nothing else that could produce any kind of offense. So 2011, 2012, terrible deadline. I hate you, Glenn Sather.
Yeah, they called Chris Kreider out of college to come and score 5 goals for them in the playoffs. So yeah, no, that was how dire the need for more scoring was. And I think one of the things that I don't remember this specifically, but I know has been said about that deadline is there was less business than usual because of the impending lockout. So
Mm-hmm.
teams were not eager to make trades because they didn't know what the landscape was going to look like in the offseason and into the 12-13 season. So that's part of why I think it was a less active trade market. But that said, like you pointed out, Nick, LA goes and gets Jeff Carter and wins the cup. So there were moves to be made.
Oh yeah, it's finding the right one, and Sather didn't find the right one, unfortunately. Number 2, I'm so sorry for everybody in advance for bringing this up. I didn't want to write it down, and I didn't even want to think about it, but of course it came flooding back. Trading for Ole Jokinen.
Oh,
Oh,
shivers went down
Sorry,
my spine.
sorry. I mean, do I even have to say anything else besides that?
What
No.
did they give up? I don't even remember.
I think that was. Hold on, I'll look that up because I do remember that very well. I think that was because he was on Calgary, if I'm correct on
Yes.
that. So
Yep.
I think that was if I'm correct, I might be wrong. I think that might have been the Coda Leak trade. Probably not. I'm probably wrong.
I
I have
actually
to
think
double
that's right.
check.
I think it was Aleshko Leak who went the other way.
Let's
I mean,
see.
actually, so the return, the what they had to give up isn't that bad.
Okay, so here we go. It says Jokinen was involved. Yeah, so I was right. Jokinen was involved in the trade to the New York Rangers, where he was sent with Brandon Prust in exchange for Alesh Kodelik and Chris Higgins.
Oh, Chris Higgins, who didn't work out. That was a good
Yeah,
idea that didn't work out. Yeah.
it was a good idea that didn't work. Oh man, the best part of that deal actually turned out to be Brandon Prust. As funny as that could be,
Yes.
but
He was a key to that, one of the keys of that 11-12 team, although again, wasn't bringing much scoring with him, but that's neither here nor
No.
there.
But yeah, adding Ole Jokinen, I'll never forgive you for, I think you're still doing circles in your own end in the Wells Fargo Center. Oh, okay. Number 1, this one hurts my soul for multiple reasons. After Mark Messier, he was my next favorite New York Ranger, and he's one of my top 3 favorite Rangers of all time. Brian Leach
Mm-hmm.
should have never been traded. should have been a Ranger for life. I'll never forgive you, Glenn Sather. I hate you so much. And then what made it even worse was one of the picks we got from Toronto in that deal we used to take Michael Sauer, and Sauer's career ended. So for multiple reasons, and of course it happened against Toronto that Michael Sauer's
Against Toronto,
career
right?
ended.
Dion Phaneuf was
I,
playing for Toronto.
Dion
Right?
Phaneuf.
yeah, ironically enough. So for multiple reasons, I hate the Brian Leach trade. That is the worst trade that the New York Rangers ever made next to Jean Rattel and Brad Park to Boston for Carol Vadnais and Phil Esposito. It is right there. Absolutely atrocious. Scarred me for life as a child. I hate you, Sather.
Well,
Yep.
I didn't I was just thinking about it offhand. I think you pretty much named a lot of the outside of the Brian Leach one. I think you pretty much named a lot of the ones that I was thinking about. I'll just comment on a couple of them, just to, because I was, as you were mentioning them, I was just thinking about like my thought process at the time and, what I feel about it now. So, so starting with the McDonough trade, I vividly remember where I was with that because I had just gotten food poisoning like a couple days prior. So when the trade happened, I had like a bowl of soup that my sister had made for me, and I was just like violently ill in my room. And I was just trying to reason with it because I was by that time I was a pretty young adult, and the Rangers had just always been good relative to every other sports team that I root for. So it was kind of strange to see, I just, had seen McDonough in a Ranger uniform, and then you see Nash getting traded and all that. So it was a little surreal to kind of see the hockey team that was so good for basically my teenage and, beginning of adult life kind of fall apart. Even then I knew the trade was a little light. But I held out a hope because if you look at the time, okay, I'm not going to say now, but if you look at the time relative to what the Rangers were looking for, right? You looked at a guy like Brett Howden, who, was first of all, he was a lot better than his brother, and he kind of fit more of what the Rangers were looking for in like a bottom six role, where he could, decent skater, could, win faceoffs and, kind of be decent with the puck. Turns out he
Well,
was
he was a
none of that.
scorer in junior hockey too. I mean, he was
Right.
considered one of Tampa's best prospects. So it's,
Right.
yeah, and it's also why I think you're bringing up a good point here, JL, where you do how you judge a trade in the moment does matter. Even though, with 5 years of hindsight, sure, this didn't pan out, that didn't pan out. It's easy to criticize. Like they did get a lot of volume. Now, look, the Hayek thing, that was the Rangers, and people have made a lot of jokes now the last couple of years since they fired the entire European scouting department in the wake of Jeff Gorton leaving, and things have seemed to have improved overall in the scouting department with the Rangers.
Right.
I think they insisted on Hayek in that trade. Like that was a big part of it. And
They
he
did.
obviously turned out to be a complete bust. But no, look, Howden was a highly touted prospect. Again, he scored in junior. He was on that 2018 World Junior team, which, obviously has much deeper, darker, horrible issues surrounding it now. But
Right.
and he was not involved in that incident. I want to be perfectly clear. But look, he goes on to be a depth player on a Stanley Cup champion. I mean, that's a pretty good. He's a good NHLer. I mean,
yeah.
Whatever you want to say about him, he turned out to be a good NHLer. And also, look, Vlad Nemesnikov coming back. I mean, he's one of those players who's going to end up playing for 12 or 13 teams, but he's a useful NHL player. So, and they got 2 first-round picks. So I agree with you, JL. Like the volume that they got back made sense.
Right.
But the way it all panned out, it now looks like a total disaster.
Right. And, a lot of people at the time were insisting on Sergachev, and you kind of already knew that wasn't going to happen because Steve Yzerman, you can already tell, because he had just started, pretty much kind of making his mark on the league.
He was in the
and
NHL at that point. Yeah.
Right. And, he's very bullish, and he wasn't just going to give up. You kind of saw what Yzerman was trying to build with his crew in Tampa. So they weren't just going to bend over and give up. You're not going to give up a guy like Sergachev for a guy like McDonough, even though they ended up re-signing McDonough. So Jeff Gordon definitely did get taken to school on that trade. I do know, I can see why I can see why they did trade for Libor Hayek, because Libor Hayek was it's weird about Hayek. Phenomenal skater in juniors, right? He was very good in juniors with, I think it was with Regina, and I think I can't remember the other team he was with, but I recall him being on the Regina Pats, and a lot of what I saw in the replay was him stepping up, similar to what Adam Fox does, except not as skilled, where he was stepping up, making a lot of offensive plays. And I think that's what the draw was, because there wasn't really much on the back end. A lot of the back end for the Rangers at the time, if you look at it, with Girardi, Stahl, McDonough, guys like Anton Strawman, they weren't really mobile. So I think that's what they were looking for. It just so happened that he couldn't figure it out here. And it sucks, because when he came up, he was showing flashes of that skill set that got the Rangers to want to pick him up in the first place. And I recall, when they were talking about the trade itself, Jeff Gordon had said, well, we like to keep just because we don't draft the player doesn't mean we don't keep a binder of information on the player. I'm like, oh, wow, you're just pretty much telling, the rest of the league that you're doing your job, So that trade at the time, I was, I knew it was a light return. And on Nemestikov's Nemestikov, he was going to be gone in about a year or two. In regards to the Eric Stahl trade, okay.
Oh, by the way, I think Ryan Johansson just scored for Colorado.
Yeah, he just did. Yeah.
It was actually a pretty nice goal. So
yeah, it was a backhand. He was going to the side of the net. He was a bit off angle. Yeah. So hey, maybe that might make the bounty a little bit more. So in regards to the Eric Stahl trade, this might be considered unpopular. I actually liked it at the time being. And this is the reason why I liked it. I didn't, if there's one thing you'll know about me, I am probably the most optimistic person you'll ever find. And I just remember sitting in the back of my church one day, because I was a music guy, and I looked at my phone and I saw that they had made a trade, and they traded this Alexei Sorella guy, and I think a first-round pick, for Eric Stahl. Eric Stahl, great. This guy, he could play center, his brother's on the team. Like I ate it all up, for the reasons that Becky and you, Rob, despised it, is I ate it up. The jerseys came out with the M. Stahl and the E. Stahl, which I almost ended up buying one. I still might do it just to kind of, get some people angry, but because I actually like the way it looks on the back of a jersey. But what ended up happening was, again, like you guys mentioned, you look back at it now, and then you started to see it towards the end of the season. That team was not good. That was probably the worst 100-point team I've ever seen. They were just, and then it didn't help that. Yeah, and then they were frauds. Victor Stahlberg and freaking Emerson Edom.
Well, they were propped up by Lundqvist. Lundqvist was incredible that whole year, and
right,
they were just, that was all. That was it. I mean, he was the whole team.
Yeah. So, and then, AV not using Yandel and Stahl properly, which, and then, like you guys said, he goes to Montreal and Minnesota and absolutely kills it, which just, burned my blood, but I actually did like that trade when it happened. What was the other trade? The Olli Jokinen trade. I was so confused by that, because I said, well, where are we going to put him? I mean, I think Chris Drury wasn't as hurt on that team that year. And I'm just trying to remember, like, where are we going to put him? What does he do? What does he do exactly? Like, I know he was a good player, but it's like, where are we going to put him? And funny enough, I remember the day that I actually didn't see the shootout. I went to Modell's at the end of the third period. I went to Modell's. I got hockey sticks, street hockey sticks. I came back. I had left the TV on here in my room, and then the season was over. So I had to look for the highlight online and just completely see, oh, wow, they're not making the playoffs this year. So I definitely,
the worst thing about that trade to me is the fact that one of the reasons why we got him was because of how good he was in shootouts.
Right. Which is amazing that even factored into trades back then, because now you would not even consider that at all.
like it was one of the like because I remember people saying like propping him up as he's one of the best shootout men in the league. And so one of the reasons why the Rangers went out and got him was for his shootout prowess.
Shootout
And
prowess.
and that's where we needed him, and that's where he let us down.
And that's where
The
he let us
irony
down.
refuses to escape me on that.
And the funny part too is that you talk about the Rangers looking for, someone who could be good in the shootout is the only reason why Eric Christensen was the number one center for so long. It's because he was just really good at the shootout. It was amazing how good, like outside of Zuccarello, he was probably, the best shootout guy on this team we've seen outside of like Mika and Panarin at this point. And as far as the other deadlines go, it's it was just a weird time just to see them try to make these moves, and especially that 11-12 deadline, you know. Yeah, they needed more. I was very disappointed they didn't do much. Did they actually make a couple trades at that time?
Just
Was it
one.
really
It was
Just
just John
John
Scott.
Scott? That was it? I
Yep.
feel like
Yes.
they did. Wow. Oh my gosh. Yikes on bikes. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. I couldn't really like, you mentioned them and I'm thinking, yeah, that's correct because, I start thinking of the, when they let go Zuccarello and this and that and the fourth, obviously that needed to happen. The Miller one was, obviously glaring, but, they got a lot of prospects, just within those last couple of years. You could talk about the Grabner trade. You can talk about, the Zuccarello trade, and this and that and the fourth. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. I'm not going to ramble on too much because the Rangers just give me agita sometimes, at least in the past.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think it's when you're selling, especially when you're really selling and you're going through a rebuild, like it's just volume. You just want as many picks and prospects as possible because a lot of it's dart throws. They're not going to pan out, but it's much more consequential when you are surrendering assets to buy talent that you hope will get you over the hump. And look, I mean, just to wrap this up, I've been very impressed with Chris Drury's ability to identify what the team needs. He's shown that he can do that in both deadlines that he's overseen now. And clearly the needs are very well defined for this Ranger team. And now it's just a matter of, sticking to your guns in terms of the price, not overpaying. Should be fascinating. The trade deadline is a week from today as you listen to this. If you're listening to it on Friday, March 1st, the deadline is Friday, March 8th at, I believe, 3 p.m. We will have some level of coverage. I don't know if we're going to do a regular pod. I don't know if we're going to do something live, perhaps. What that kind of depend on people's availabilities and all that. But we will let you all know how Live from the Blue Seats and Blue Seat Blogs will be covering the 2024 NHL trade deadline. We're really looking forward to it, though. It's been some of our most fun shows. I know we've done a couple of Twitter Spaces and things like that in years past. So we shall see, and we'll let you know. Guys, any quick final thoughts before we get out of here? This is the last pod before the trade deadline, so that in and of itself feels like a milestone.
I was going to say, do we have any final predictions on the deadline and who the Rangers are going to get? Because I have two.
I'm going to say, well, here, I'll go first. I'll let you, I know. Yeah. I think it's going to be somebody like Wenberg. I think Wenberg probably happens instead of Henrique, and maybe like a Jason Zucker or somebody from like that's not as high on the radar. Riley Smith is my off the board pipe dream, which I think is has like a 12% chance of happening. So those are my three names. Oh, and they're going to get a defenseman. This is the other thing. No one's talking about this. Maybe it's like Jeremy Lauzon. It's going to be somebody who's like a 6-7D, but they're going to get a defenseman too. I do not see them going into the playoffs with this six plus Zach Jones and Connor Mackey. So I think they're going to trade for a defenseman as well.
I think Zach Jones will be on another roster. I think he gets traded at the deadline. So I think it'll be Henrique. If it's not Adam Henrique, it's either going to be Tommy Novak or Nick Bukestad as a bottom six center. And then for the first line, Vladdy Tarasenko's a pipe dream because they can't absorb his $5 million. And then, so I think it'll be for right wing one. I'm manifesting it. I want the Duke back on Broadway bring me back Anthony Duclair. So I think it'll either be Duclair, it'll be some combination of Duclair, Henrique, or Duclair, or Bukestad. Yeah.
JL, final prediction.
I'm not really one to make predictions, but I'll do it for the sake of this for this conversation because I'm almost always wrong. You talked me into it, Rob. I think it's going to be Riley Smith. I feel like Riley Smith's name has been connected with the Rangers for some time now, and it would also just be pretty interesting to have another, quasi brother duo on the team. One played for them and another one played for them at one point. They're definitely going to get a defenseman. The defenseman one's a little harder, so I can't really speak to that too much because
could be anybody. Like there's just the league's littered with guys you could trade like a 5th round pick for a 6th or 7. Yeah, that's not even worth throwing a name out. It's just like insert name here.
Yeah, and then I think the center. I think the center is going to be Henrique. And as predictable as that is, there's when there's smoke, there's fire. I don't think Vetrano gets traded here again, just due to the fact that he has term, unless Anaheim really eats up a lot of cap, at least on that deal. So I think it's going to be Henrique, Riley Smith, Jason Zucker's another name too, which I really like. I think that would actually be pretty good because he's definitely got some grit to him. But either or, and some defenseman not named Ben Harper.
All right. Those are the predictions. We'll see how it all pans out. Again, covering it all on the blog, covering it all here on the podcast. As always, thanks everybody for listening to Live from the Blue Seats, and we will catch you next week.